They say the deepest wounds are the ones you carry home. But what if home isn't just a place, but a solemn promise? 65 years of solitude melted away when an old German shepherd named Max led his broken veteran to a box canyon in the freezing heart of Wyoming. In the winter's silence, they found Star, a majestic horse crippled and trapped. This isn't just a rescue, it's a desperate bargain for redemption. A shattered man, an arthritic dog, and a forgotten mare. To save her, he must finally face the past he abandoned long ago. Will their second chance rise from the ashes of his guilt? Or will the icy secrets of the Bighorn Mountains bury them all? The winter air that rushed through the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming was not merely cold. It was a physical weight, dense with the threat of ice and early snow. The town of Buffalo itself, nestled against the vast, unforgiving landscape, looked like a cluster of determined granite stones, defying the inevitable descent of the season. At 65 years old, Ethan Hayes felt the cold deep in his bones, a constant grinding ache that settled in his lower back and the scar tissue around his left knee, permanent reminders of jumps taken and landings missed during his 2 decades as an elite Army Ranger. He drove an ancient, sputtering Ford pickup, its paint faded to the color of dusty sagebrush and its heater having given up the ghost somewhere near the state line. Beside him, occupying the passenger seat, with the quiet dignity of a seasoned sentinel, sat Max, a German shepherd whose coat was a striking blend of gray and white, the muzzle frosted with the undeniable evidence of his 10 years of life. Max wasn't just a pet, he was a retired K-9 service dog, having spent his prime years in deployment, and though he carried the visible scars of age, he possessed the keen, unwavering focus of a professional soldier, his amber eyes twitching only slightly as the open highway gave way to the narrow, pine-shadowed roads leading toward the old family homestead, some 20 miles northwest of Buffalo. Ethan wore a heavy, worn leather jacket, the zipper pulled high, but beneath it lay his characteristic garment, a soft, faded red and navy plaid flannel shirt, a simple garment that spoke more of necessity and comfort than style, and which offered scant protection against the biting air currently assaulting the truck's cabin. He ran a calloused hand over his rough, unshaven jaw. His gray eyes, though tired and rimmed with fatigue, narrowed as he finally saw the dilapidated main road sign. This was the end of the line, the final destination on a map that had run out of purpose, or so he thought. He pulled the truck into the gravel lot of a general store on the edge of Buffalo, the kind of place that sold everything from hunting licenses to dry goods. Killing the engine brought a sudden, heavy silence. "Stay here, buddy," Ethan murmured, running his hand over the thick fur of Max's head. Max, a creature of discipline and deep intuition, simply blinked, conveying his silent understanding, and settled his great, heavy head onto the seat. Ethan stepped out, stretching his spine until it popped audibly, and walked stiffly toward the store entrance. As he reached the door, it swung open, and a man filled the frame, bringing with him a gust of expensive cologne and the scent of fine, cured leather. He was a large man, perhaps 50 years old, with a confident, fleshy face and sharp, dismissive eyes. This was Vernon Thorne. Thorne wore a pristine, expensive shearling coat of soft, off-white leather, a garment that looked like it had never seen a day of honest work or dirt, and a new, perfectly shaped cowboy hat that sat slightly tilted on his head, conveying an air of self-importance. Thorne paused, his eyes sweeping over Ethan's worn boots, the faded flannel visible beneath the cracked leather jacket, and finally resting on Ethan's tired, guarded face. "Well, look at what the wind blew in," Thorne said, his voice a slow, patronizing drawl that Ethan recognized instantly from his childhood visits. "Ethan Hayes, Jeremiah's boy. I heard a rumor about an old truck limping into town. Should have known it was you, the one who ran off to play soldier and never looked back." Thorne's words were laced with an old resentment that had clearly been fermenting for 3 decades. Ethan stiffened, the ache in his knee momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deep, familiar heat in his neck. He did not want to engage in this conversation. He had come home to sell the last piece of a memory and disappear quietly. "Just passing through, Thorne," Ethan replied, his voice low and raspy from days spent alone on the road. Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Passing through," he says. "Ethan, I own everything here now. Thorne Ranches and Land Company, from the Bighorn foothills to the river valley. I own the air you breathe. That scrap heap you inherited, it's an eyesore, a blight on my view, an open wound in my beautiful landscape." Thorne stepped closer, invading Ethan's personal space with deliberate intimidation. "I'll make you an offer right now, cash. Enough to fill your tank and get you a warm seat on a bus down to Arizona. You've been gone 30 years. The land died the moment you left. It's time to let the rest of it go." The blunt, calculated insult about the land and his long-ago abandonment struck a nerve that had been raw for decades. Ethan felt the familiar, corrosive guilt surge, the shame of not being there for his parents when they needed him most, a wound deeper than any shrapnel. But alongside the guilt, a soldier's pride, a stubborn refusal to retreat under fire, snapped into focus. Ethan met Thorne's gaze, his gray eyes hardening. "It's not for sale, Thorne. Now get out of my way." Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the hardness in the old man's voice. He recovered quickly, sneering, "Suit yourself. When the first big snow hits, don't come crawling back to Buffalo. I'll buy the deed from the state when you freeze." Ethan pushed past him, ignoring the burning rage, and walked quickly back to his truck, feeling Thorne's eyes burning into his back. He climbed in, threw the truck into gear, and sped out of the lot, gravel spitting behind him. The road to the ranch was worse than he remembered, a rutted, crumbling path reclaimed by tenacious pine roots and stubborn sagebrush. When they finally crested the final hill, the homestead came into view. It was a place of ghosts. The main house was a collapsed heap of blackened timber. Only the great stone chimney remained standing like a solitary tombstone, pointing an accusing finger at the gray Wyoming sky. Ethan stopped the truck, and the silence that descended was absolute, heavy with the weight of memory and failure. "Ashes and weeds, Max," Ethan whispered, his voice catching. Max, sensing the distress, let out a low, soft whimper, a sound unlike his usual stoic composure. The dog shifted, rising onto his seat, his ears twitching, not toward the ruins of the house, but toward the tangled, overgrown brush at the back of the property, where the foothills rose steeply toward the Cloud Peak wilderness. The dog let out a sharp, insistent whine, pawing at the door handle, urging Ethan forward. This wasn't a call for relief. This was the unmistakable signal of a service animal, alerting his handler to something vital. Ignoring the protest of his bad knee, Ethan grabbed his walking stick and followed, pushing past the skeleton of the barn. Max moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating a narrow deer trail that wound around a massive granite outcropping, clearly driven by instinct. The path led to the Box Canyon, a steep-sided natural cul-de-sac he remembered playing in as a child. As they rounded the final rock face, the wind died completely, and the profound silence was broken by a soft, pained wheezing sound. Max stopped abruptly, lowering his body into a crouch, his hackles rising slightly, not in aggression but intense focus. Ethan moved up beside him, and then he saw it. Standing huddled deep in the shadows where a recent rock slide had sealed the canyon's exit was a horse. It was a quarter-horse mare, identifiable by her sturdy bone structure and broad forehead, but she was a shadow of her breed. Her coat was matted and muddy, and she was so severely emaciated that Ethan could count every rib from 20 yards away. Her eyes, dark and enormous, were filled with a terrifying mix of defiance and desperate fear. But it was her front left leg that drew a gasp from Ethan. It was mangled, not just overgrown but infected and twisted, with a deep, open wound weeping near the coronet band, clearly causing agonizing pain with every shift of weight. She was trapped, injured, and starving to death in a stone cage. Ethan named her instantly in his mind, Star. Max, looking up at his master, let out a soft, low growl, a sound that was less a threat and more a profound declaration. This is a life that needs us. The horse's eyes, reflecting the dim, cold light of the canyon, held the same look Ethan remembered seeing in the eyes of a young private he couldn't save 40 years ago, a desperate, defiant refusal to surrender. In that moment, standing beside his loyal dog, looking at the broken creature before him, the raw, corrosive guilt Ethan had carried for 3 decades, over abandoning his parents and his past, coalesced into a fierce, singular purpose. This wasn't just a rescue mission for an animal. This was his desperate, final chance for redemption. He let out a long, ragged breath that turned to steam in the freezing air. "We're not leaving, Max," Ethan whispered, his voice firming with a command he hadn't spoken in years. "We have work to do." The morning that dawned over the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains was a study in crystalline cruelty. The air was still, but the cold had intensified, sinking its claws deeper into the granite and the frozen earth, making every inhalation a painful shock to the lungs. For Ethan Hayes, the priority was survival, and that meant moving Star. After 2 hours of backbreaking, cautious work, using the truck's winch and old lengths of hemp rope, he scavenged from the ruined barn. Ethan managed to guide the terrified, weak quarter-horse mare out of the box canyon. Every step Star took was agony, her injured front left leg protesting with sharp, painful spasms, the open wound weeping an ominous mix of blood and fluid. Ethan's own body screamed in protest, his knees burned, and the dull, grinding ache in his lower back had escalated to a persistent, sharp line of fire, a painful reminder that his own machine, like the old Ford, was running on worn-out parts and sheer will. He settled Star into the old pump house, a low, sturdy structure made of river stone and thick timbers built deep into the side of a small hill near the creek. This wasn't a stable, but its thick stone walls, meant to insulate the deep well pump, offered infinitely more protection than the open air. This was their new bunker, their temporary sanctuary against the vast, indifferent cold of Wyoming. Ethan worked quickly, spreading salvaged hay on the packed dirt floor and filling an old trough with fresh, cold creek water. He knelt beside Star's injured leg, running his calloused, flannel-covered hands over the thick, knotty hide. The wound was worse than he had initially feared. It was a deep laceration near the coronet band, already inflamed, hot to the touch, and threatening to spread infection up the leg bone. Without immediate aggressive antibiotics, the beautiful mare would not survive the week. Ethan looked at his hands, steady and capable, from years of field dressing and triage. But he was not a veterinarian, and his meager supply of travel-sized antiseptic wouldn't cut it. He needed a broad-spectrum penicillin, specialized wound dressing, and surgical equipment robust enough to clean the deep, festering injury, items that cost hundreds of dollars, money he simply did not possess. The urgency gnawed at him, pushing the exhaustion to the background. He had to make the pump house safe, and he needed a plan. Max, sensing the shift in his handler's tension, remained close, his big gray head often resting on Ethan's thigh as he worked. Ethan began clearing decades of debris, broken buckets, rusted tools, and rotting sacks from the stone walls. As he reached a corner where the earth floor had settled unevenly, Max abruptly stopped his silent patrol, his ears pricked forward. The old German shepherd dropped his head, sniffing intently at a loose section of the stone wall near the foundation, letting out a soft, low huff that was Max's equivalent of a shouted alert. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan murmured, kneeling down. Following Max's insistence, Ethan leveraged a small, loose stone. Behind it, concealed within a shallow alcove, was a rectangular metal box, dark olive drab, clearly military surplus, the kind used to store .50 caliber rounds, waterproof and airtight. Ethan recognized the style instantly. It was exactly like the kind his own unit used decades ago. His heart began to hammer with a slow, heavy rhythm that spoke not of physical exertion, but of memory. He pulled the box free and flipped the latch. The rubber gasket had held perfectly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and dust. On top lay a thick, yellowed manila envelope. Beneath it was a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by time. Ethan opened the envelope first. It contained the original deed to the ranch, still legally filed under the Hayes family name. He set the paper aside, his hand trembling slightly, and reached for the journal. The handwriting was jagged and strong. It was his grandfather's script. Ethan flipped to the back and taped securely to the inside cover. He found what Max's intuition had sensed. A small, meticulously hand-drawn map, faded but legible, detailing a specific sector of the property near the canyon. Beneath the map was a letter, penned in the same forceful hand, dated 1952. Ethan read it, the words burning through the decades. "To whomever finds this, I could never raise the money to buy back the river acreage they stole, but I took the last of the good walnut wood and built a legacy. The rifle is hidden at the final marker on this map. It is the finest Winchester this county has ever seen. It is waterproofed and ready. Keep it safe. It is our family's asset for redemption. Use it to secure this land, or use it to begin anew. E. Hayes, 1952. The legacy settled upon Ethan like a physical weight. The Winchester rifle. A unique, custom-built rifle of that age and quality, especially with a clear family provenance, would be worth a fortune to collectors, easily tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't just metal and wood, it was leverage, the key to the future, the asset for redemption his grandfather had promised. And suddenly, Vernon Thorne's aggressive pursuit of the scrap heap made perfect cold sense. Thorne, the descendant of the very people who had likely stolen the river acreage generations ago, wasn't after a few hundred acres of weeds. He was hunting the family legacy, a legendary Winchester rifle he believed was buried somewhere on the property. Thorne hadn't wanted Ethan to stay long enough to discover the secret. Ethan closed the box with a sharp click. The need for specialized medical care for Star was no longer a simple issue of life and death. It was now a matter of strategic urgency. If Star died before Ethan could secure the rifle, he would lose his focus, lose his land, and lose his chance at penance. He needed the antibiotics now. He needed to buy time. He needed money. And the only thing of any real value he possessed was strapped to his wrist. Ethan drove the battered Ford back into Buffalo. He didn't go to a bank. He went to a small, cluttered shop on a side street, its sign reading Jenkins General Store and Loans. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Carol Jenkins, a woman who looked every bit of her 70 years, her silver hair neatly pulled back in a tight bun, her face a roadmap of kind lines and quiet wisdom. She wore a thick, warm green knitted cardigan over a simple dress, protected by an old floral print apron, an image of timeless, rural reliability. Mrs. Jenkins had run the store with her husband until his passing 5 years prior, and her reputation for kindness and fair dealing was the quiet backbone of the community. Ethan approached the counter, his leather jacket squeaking, the flannel visible beneath. He didn't place a watch on the glass. Instead, with a trembling hand, he unstrapped a heavy, blocky piece of equipment from his wrist, a military heart rate monitor with a worn canvas strap, its casing dented and scratched. It wasn't worth much to a pawn dealer, but to Ethan it was priceless. This monitor had been his companion through every combat jump, every field hospital, and every long, silent night of guard duty. It kept time not for the clock, but for his own precarious life. "I need $300, Mrs. Jenkins," Ethan rasped, his voice tight with the humiliation of begging. "This is military issue. It still works." Mrs. Jenkins peered at him over her small glasses, her sharp, perceptive eyes taking in the worn flannel, the desperate set of his jaw, and the subtle tremor in his hands. She picked up the monitor, turning the heavy metal casing over slowly. She knew the Hayes family name, knew the history of the old ranch. She also knew that a man who parts with a service artifact, this personal, isn't just broke. He's fighting for something. "I can't give you $300 for this, Ethan," she said softly, her voice warm and clear. "But I can give you the full cash equivalent for what you need. The medicine, the specialized dressings, and the right surgical nippers, and hold this for you, interest-free, until you get back on your feet. You're fighting for that land, aren't you, son? And I think you're fighting for more than just a deed." She looked directly at him, a simple, knowing look that cut straight through his soldier's facade. Ethan swallowed hard, the unexpected compassion striking him with the force of a physical blow. He nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Carol Jenkins smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes and reached beneath the counter for the necessary supplies and a small wad of cash. The air inside the pump house remained biting, but the thick stone walls held the cruelest edge of the Wyoming winter at bay. Ethan Hayes returned from Buffalo, his leather jacket stiff with cold, carrying a burden of supplies that felt heavier than any combat pack. The surgical nippers, the deep-acting antibiotics, and the specialized dressings Mrs. Carol Jenkins had helped him procure. He knew this was the moment of truth. Star, the quarter-horse mare, watched him with wide, intelligent eyes, trembling not just from fear, but from the high fever raging through her emaciated body. Ethan Hayes, the 65-year-old former Army Ranger, moved with the rigid economy of someone fighting against severe, persistent pain, his flannel-clad arms steady despite the ache in his knees. He secured the mare with a quick, professional knot, then knelt to the task. The metallic scent of the medical supplies mingled with the musk of horse and hay, creating a strange, tense atmosphere. Ethan injected the first dose of antibiotics deep into Star's neck muscle, a necessary sting that made the mare jump violently. Then came the hard part, cleaning the wound and removing the necrotic infected tissue. He used the specialized nippers, his jaw clenched against the nauseating odor of decay. When he clipped a deep, stubborn piece of dead tissue, the mare shrieked, a sound of pure agony that tore through the quiet pump house. Star plunged, fighting the restraint, her hooves tearing up the packed earth floor. She was terrified and overwhelmed by pain, ready to pull free and crush Ethan against the stone wall. "Easy, Star. Hold on, girl," Ethan yelled, trying to leverage the mare's weight, but the horse was too powerful, too panicked. He knew if Star injured herself further in this frenzy, it would be over. "Max, help me, buddy," Ethan commanded, his voice tight. Max, the 10-year-old German shepherd, had been lying patiently near the door, his gray muzzle resting on his paws, watching the tense procedure. At the command, the old K9 rose instantly. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, and he didn't move toward Star's thrashing legs. Instead, Max moved with silent, disciplined purpose directly into the mare's personal space, positioning himself immediately in front of Star's lowered head. Then, in a practiced motion honed over years of comforting traumatized soldiers, Max lay down on the dirty floor, exposing his chest and neck, and rested his head heavily on his paws. It was the quintessential signal of deep pressure therapy and surrender. The natural predator, the wolf's descendant, was utterly calm, vulnerable, and unthreatening. Star stopped thrashing, her frantic hyperventilation slowing, her wild, dark eyes fixed on the dog, the ancient equine instinct warring with the visual evidence. If the predator was sleeping, there could be no immediate danger. Max remained an immovable, calm anchor, his steady breathing creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the mare's panic. With the horse subdued by the dog's unwavering presence, Ethan, his hands shaking slightly, was able to return to the gruesome task, meticulously cleaning the infection and bandaging the wound. Max held the line for nearly an hour, rising only when Ethan finally secured the last bandage. It was a testament to the K9's training and profound connection to the concept of service, a mutual trust that transcended species. As the immediate crisis passed, Ethan stood, groaning as his protesting joints shifted. He looked out the pump house window, which was little more than a small, high slit in the stone wall, the light already failing. That's when he saw them. Two figures roughly dressed in generic ranch hands gear, heavy denim and stiff canvas jackets, hunched near the skeleton of the collapsed barn, binoculars raised toward the pump house. They were Vernon Thorne's men, hired hands, smelling of cheap diesel and impatience, scouting the perimeter. Ethan hadn't gotten the rifle yet, and Thorne was pressing. They were clearly looking for signs of digging for any clue to the Winchesters' location. Ethan quietly whispered a command to Max, his voice dropping into the low, firm register of military communication. The old German shepherd, who had just spent an hour in therapy mode, transitioned instantly back to K9 perimeter defense. He didn't bark. A bark would have betrayed their exact position and strength. Instead, Max moved like a ghost, silent over the frost-covered ground, keeping to the shadows of the ruins. He circled the intruders, utilizing his superior scent and hearing, occasionally snapping a dry twig or letting out a single low woof that echoed unnervingly off the canyon walls. Just enough noise in the surrounding darkness to make the rough-looking men nervous. Max was using fear and uncertainty as his weapons, convincing the intruders they were being observed by something much larger and more dangerous than they expected. After 10 agonizing minutes, the two figures dropped their binoculars, exchanged nervous glances, and retreated back toward the road, driven off by the psychological warfare of one old, silent dog. The adrenaline rush faded, leaving Ethan weak and shivering. He checked Star one last time. The mare was quiet, but her fever remained high, and his own body had been pushed past its breaking point. He stumbled to his makeshift bed, a pile of blankets near the wall, the heavy flannel shirt clinging to his skin with cold sweat. He didn't even bother taking off his boots. As he collapsed, the world began to spin. The infection Star carried, the sheer exhaustion, and the profound stress of the confrontation with Thorne and the men all coalesced into a brutal high fever. The cold stone floor seemed to melt away, and the sounds of the Wyoming night began to warp. The distant moan of the wind transformed into the whine of incoming mortar rounds. The rhythmic wheezing of the mare became the ragged breathing of a wounded soldier. Ethan's eyes snapped open, his vision blurry, the stone walls of the pump house twisting and reforming into the muddy sandbags of a bunker 40 years ago. He was back in the war, "Private, get down, keep your head low." Ethan Hayes, the 65-year-old veteran, was gone, replaced by Sergeant Hayes, 1971, his voice raspy and panicked. He thrashed, trying to escape the blankets that felt like mud and debris pinning him down. He saw Star in the corner, but his fevered mind saw a young corpsman bleeding out. "Hold on, son, the bird is coming. Don't you close your eyes." The guilt of surviving, of abandoning his parents, of being too late, flooded his consciousness, threatening to drown him in the hot, suffocating humidity of his memory. Max, who had been resting near the door, shot up instantly. He had seen this before. He knew the scent of sheer terror and the erratic rhythm of a mind trapped by ghosts. This was not a physical ailment. This was the ghost sickness. Without hesitation, the old German shepherd walked carefully over Ethan's legs and climbed onto his master's chest. Max was heavy, over 80 pounds of solid warm weight. He lay down directly on Ethan's torso, utilizing the final technique in his therapy arsenal: deep, undeniable physical pressure. Ethan gasped, his breath punched out of him. "Get off me! I have to move! I have to save him!" Max whined softly, a deep, vibrating sound in his throat, and began to lick Ethan's face with rough, wet insistence. The wetness, the smell of warm, slightly damp dog fur, and the crushing, solid weight of Max's body were physical realities impossible to ignore. Ethan blinked, fighting the fever, his hands grasping at the thick, familiar gray and white fur. The imagined heat of the jungle dissolved, replaced by the profound, cleansing cold of the pumphouse air. The sound of artillery faded back into the muffled howl of the Wyoming wind. "Max," Ethan whispered, the sergeant's panic replaced by the exhaustion of the old man. "I'm here. We're here." The dog stayed put, a heavy, living anchor, his presence an undeniable truth. Ethan Hayes wrapped his arms around the loyal German shepherd, letting the solid weight of Max's body and the unwavering presence of the present moment pull him back from the darkest corner of his abandoned past. He was safe, and they were together. The change in the Wyoming air was not a gradual cooling, it was a violent, elemental assault. It began with the barometer plummeting so rapidly that Ethan Hayes felt the sharp, familiar pressure building behind his eyes. The wind shrieked down from the Cloud Peak wilderness, instantly whipping the thin first flakes into a blinding horizontal curtain of ice and snow. This was not a snowstorm, it was a whiteout, the kind of brutal high plains blizzard that swallowed the world whole and gave no quarter. Inside the pumphouse, the rough-hewn timbers groaned against the force of the gale. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and Ethan knew that if he did not act immediately, their sanctuary would quickly become their tomb. Ethan Hayes, the 65-year-old former ranger, moved with a sudden, painful urgency, ignoring the shrieks from his protesting knees. He tore apart the salvaged bales of rotting hay he had stored nearby and mixed the straw with the thick, clay-rich mud he had excavated from the creek bank before it froze solid. His hands, though protected by heavy, cracked leather gloves, quickly grew numb from the freezing sludge. He worked relentlessly, pushing the thick, fibrous mixture, a technique learned in a forgotten field manual, into every crack and fissure between the river stones of the pumphouse walls. Max, the 10-year-old German shepherd, watched his master's frantic labor, his gray and white coat already dusted with frost. Max lay flat, conserving energy, but his eyes, sharp and amber, scanned the swirling white chaos outside, recognizing the profound danger of the siege. Ethan worked until he could barely stand, draping heavy canvas tarps over the door and securing them with rocks and scavenged nails, turning the stone structure into an airtight, defensible bunker. Star, the injured quarter-horse mare, watched him, her breathing slow and steady, her large eyes filled with a new, quiet trust. Ethan's exhaustion was absolute, but the sheer physical labor of securing the pump house had forced the lingering fever from his body, leaving him clear-headed and grim. But the elements were not the only enemy that night. Just as the blizzard reached its blinding peak, when visibility dropped to mere feet, a vehicle crawled up the winding, rutted track. Vernon Thorne was not a patient man, and the previous day's defeat at the hands of an old dog had solidified his resolve. Thorne, wearing his pristine, expensive shearling coat, a garment ridiculously unsuited for a blizzard, arrived with two of his men, a calculated act of aggression. He knew that any legal interference would be impossible in the whiteout, and he fully intended to use the cover of the storm to secure the Winchester rifle and force Ethan off the land. The sound of Thorne's large diesel pickup crunching through the deeper snow was a menacing sound that cut through the howl of the wind. "He's here, Max," Ethan whispered, his hand instinctively gripping the heavy iron crowbar he had secured beside the door. "He's making his move." The pump house, meant to withstand the elements, now had to withstand the calculated greed of a wealthy man. Thorne's men began moving across the property, armed with shovels and headlamps, searching the perimeter lines for the location marker on their own incomplete maps. Ethan Hayes, the former ranger, shifted instantly into tactical mode. He couldn't fight them physically. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and Starr's condition demanded that he avoid violence. He had to use deception. He grabbed a handful of salvaged railroad spikes and threw them randomly across the yard near the pump house entrance, creating an improvised minefield. He instructed Max with sharp, quiet commands, sending the old K9 out into the swirling snow. Max, moving silently and low to the ground, used the wind and the shadows to his advantage, circling the search parties. He emitted sharp, unexpected growls from different locations, creating the illusion of a larger, unseen perimeter defense team. The men, disoriented by the whiteout and the constant unseen threats, became nervous, their flashlights darting wildly into the white oblivion. Ethan used the sound of the storm to his advantage, hammering loudly against the stone walls with his crowbar at irregular intervals, simulating the setting of trap stakes or booby traps. The psychological warfare worked. Thorne's men were slowed, hesitant, constantly looking over their shoulders. Thorne huddled near his truck, cursed loudly, frustrated that his simple search had devolved into a tactical nightmare. While the siege raged outside, Ethan retreated briefly into the cramped, thick-walled silence of the pump house interior. He knew this tactical victory was temporary. Thorne would not retreat permanently. He had to find the rifle now. He pulled out his grandfather's letter and the hand-drawn map, laying them on a small plank beneath the weak, flickering beam of his battery lamp. He had studied them constantly, but the final cryptic marker, a small symbol resembling a star in a cluster of lines, had always defied him. He looked at the details of the pump house, the placement of the old well, and then back at the map, visualizing the layout from his ranger training perspective. The map wasn't showing a physical landmark. It was showing a sightline, an alignment. He realized the star symbol corresponded not to the ground, but to the constellation Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, as seen aligned with the crest of the Bighorn Mountains at the winter solstice. He rushed back to the door slit, peering into the swirling whiteout. Though the stars were hidden, the alignment pointed to one inescapable location, the old cedar tree that grew precariously close to the rim of the Box Canyon, the very place where Max had found Starr, the place where the earth sloped dramatically into the gorge. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The rifle was there. The heirloom, the asset for redemption, was within striking distance of Vernon Thorne's search parties. Ethan Hayes clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He looked at Star, the quarter-horse mare, resting quietly, the antibiotics now fighting the deep infection. He looked at Max, the old K9, lying on the floor, panting softly from his perimeter patrol. Their entire survival hinged on that rifle. If Thorne found it, he would use its existence to claim legal ownership of the property, condemn the land as unsuitable, and condemn Star to death as a liability. Ethan was no longer fighting for pride or memory. He was fighting for the lives of the 3 broken beings huddled in the stone bunker. The wind screamed outside, a primal sound of rage and cold. Ethan stood, his flannel-clad chest heaving, his eyes burning with a focused, grim resolve. He grabbed a heavy shovel, the last implement of his failed past. He had to move. He had to get to that cedar tree before Thorne did. The second chance depended on winning this final skirmish. The blizzard was over. The violence of the whiteout was replaced by a profound, breathtaking silence under a sun so brilliant and cold it made the world ache. The Bighorn foothills were buried under 3 feet of dry, crystalline snow, turning the landscape into a vast, untouchable diamond field. Following his discovery, Ethan Hayes and Max had successfully braved the blinding storm one last time to retrieve the long, lead-lined military crate containing the Winchester rifle from the base of the old cedar tree, securing the asset for redemption inside the pump house just as the sun rose. Now, hours later, the silence was shattered by the grinding sound of a county plow clearing the long, rutted road to the Hayes property. Trailing the plow were 2 vehicles, the immense chrome-laden pickup of Vernon Thorne and an official SUV belonging to the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Thorne was here, expecting not just victory, but a body. Sheriff Ben, a man in his mid-50s with a tired but steady face carved by years of dealing with the harsh realities of rural Wyoming, steered the SUV through the deep snow. Sheriff Ben wore the standard khaki uniform of the county department, overlaid with a thick, practical brown sheriff's coat and a wide-brimmed hat, the look of a man who dealt in facts, not emotions. He had taken Thorne's call at first light, the rancher feigning concern but unable to mask his predatory impatience. Thorne was ready to condemn the land and claim salvage rights. Sheriff Ben was grim, expecting the worst. A 65-year-old man in a ruined homestead during a whiteout spelled certain tragedy. Thorne pulled up beside the sheriff, looking impeccably groomed despite the weather, his expensive shearling coat, off-white ivory, standing out sharply against the pure white snow. "Well, let's get this over with, Sheriff," Thorne called out, his breath pluming impatiently. "We need to secure the assets before the scavengers arrive." Sheriff Ben gave Thorne a long, level look. "This is a welfare check, Mr. Thorne. I'll take the lead." They walked past the ruined skeleton of the main house, the snowdrifts reaching the windows of Ethan's truck. Thorne sneered, gesturing at the desolation. "See, Sheriff, utter squalor. Condemn it." But then Sheriff Ben stopped, his eyes focusing on the low, unassuming stone structure of the pump house. A thin, lazy plume of wood smoke was rising steadily from a makeshift vent, a sign of controlled heat. And standing outside the pump house entrance, stretching slowly in the morning sun, was Star. The quarter-horse mare was still lean, but she was standing firmly on all 4 feet, her injured leg heavily bandaged and stable. She was no longer a shadow. More startlingly, draped securely over Star's back, providing crucial warmth and protection, was a faded, olive-drab military field jacket, its name tape clearly visible. The pump house door creaked open. Ethan Hayes, 65, emerged. He looked gaunt, his face a landscape of fatigue and gray stubble, but his eyes were clear, steady, and devoid of the terror Thorne expected. He wore his red and navy plaid flannel shirt beneath a basic, worn wool coat. Max, the 10-year-old German shepherd, walked with a noticeable stiffness, but positioned himself immediately at Ethan's heel, his amber eyes locked firmly on Thorn. "Morning, gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice raspy, holding a tin mug of steaming coffee. "You're blocking my light." Thorn's face flushed with disbelief and pure rage. You're alive? This is insanity. You're living in a hole in the ground." Sheriff Ben, however, wasn't looking at the chaos. He was looking at the expertly chinked stone walls, the canvas airlock the shovel used to clear the path, and the deliberate care shown to the horse. He saw the competence of a man who knew how to survive. He walked closer, his eyes lingering on the military jacket warming star. "That's a service jacket, Mr. Hayes," Sheriff Ben said quietly, his voice shifting from official duty to a mutual respect. "Looks like she earned it." Thorn exploded. "Sheriff, look at this! This is evidence of mental incapacity. I demand you condemn the property and remove the liability, the horse." Ethan Hayes set down his mug, the sound sharp against the heavy silence. His eyes held Thorn's unwavering. "I am in full legal and financial compliance, Mr. Thorn. I will not be removed." Ethan reached back inside the pump house and returned, placing 3 items onto a clean, snow-free patch of rock. The deed to the land, the hand-drawn map, and lying between them, gleaming faintly in the cold sun, was the long, beautiful Winchester rifle wrapped in protective cloth. "This rifle," Ethan stated, his voice now ringing with authority, "is the family's legacy, my grandfather's asset for redemption. Its appraised value, as documented here," he tapped the map, "is enough to cover the mortgage, pay off any pending debts, and fund the complete renovation of this property. My deed and my assets are secure. You are trespassing, Thorn." Sheriff Ben studied the rifle, the map, and the determined face of Ethan Hayes. He looked at the competent K9 and the surviving horse. He saw a man who had won his battle against the elements and against greed. "Mr. Thorn," Sheriff Ben stated, his voice cold and final, "Mr. Hayes is sound of mind, he has shelter, and he has secured his assets. This is private property. Your business here is concluded." Thorn sputtered, his expensive coat suddenly looking ridiculous against the harsh reality of the Wyoming survival story he had just witnessed. Defeated, he cursed and retreated, climbing into his truck and speeding away, leaving only tracks in the fresh snow. The war was over. Sheriff Ben nodded slowly to Ethan, a gesture of respect from one man of duty to another, and followed Thorn out of the valley. Ethan and Max watched them go. The sun climbed higher, warming the pump. House Stone. Over the following months, Ethan made good on his promise. He used the capital from the appraised rifle's value to pay off the remaining family debts, buy supplies, and begin repairing the old barn structure. Star healed, her quarter-horse muscle returning, the limp slowly fading. Ethan retrieved his military heart monitor from Mrs. Carol Jenkins, who greeted him with a knowing, proud smile. He hired a contractor to start rebuilding the barn. His last official act was placing a new, beautifully carved sign at the front gate. The old, forgotten name was gone. This new place had a purpose. Max, the old German shepherd, lay beside Ethan, resting his heavy head on his knee. The silence was broken by the sound of a truck pulling up the lane, a stock trailer carrying 2 figures, a quiet, arthritic Labrador mix with a service vest and a former ranch horse with a scarred shoulder. Ethan smiled, a full, genuine smile that finally erased the lines of guilt from his face. The sign read, "Max and Star Ranch, a sanctuary for the forgotten." He was no longer running from the past. He was building a home for the future. After the longest, coldest winter, the light always returns. Ethan Hayes fought the storm, the crippling guilt of his past, and the relentless greed of his neighbor. But in the end, the ultimate victory was not won with a shovel or a rifle. It was won by a quiet miracle of mutual dependence forged in a stone bunker. They say God works in mysterious ways, and perhaps the greatest blessing wasn't the discovery of the Winchester, but the unbreakable bond that saved them all. The story of the Max and Star Ranch is a powerful testament to resilience, reminding us that even the most broken spirits deserve a second chance, and sometimes our deepest redemption is found not in running from our past, but in serving others in the present. Ethan found his true calling, providing a sanctuary for the forgotten, a place where tired souls, whether human or animal, can finally find rest and healing. If this story of faith, loyalty, and healing touched your heart today, please honor the spirit of the Max and Star Ranch. Give this video a like, comment below with your favorite memory of a loyal pet, and subscribe to our channel to join our ongoing journey of hope and grace. Share this message with a friend who needs a reminder that the light always follows the dark. May God bless you and keep you safe until we meet again.